Hello, my name is Greg McKay. I'm the chair of the Australian SRV Association. This recording is of a presentation at the Australian SRV gathering held online 22nd of July 2022. The event was hosted by ASRVA, which is the SRV safeguarding group in Australia. We held the gathering for several reasons: to help strengthen the Australian SRV community, to further foster a community of practice identity, to strengthen collegial relationships among and between members of the community, and to focus on SRV in action, its everyday use. We hope you find these presentations helpful, and we again thank presenters.
I hope you're all having a wonderful gathering so far. I am, and there's more to come, so it's great. So it's my pleasure to introduce the next session, which will be presented by Sharon, Lowe and Ewan Filmer, and they're from Rockhampton. So the story they'll tell will highlight some key SRV concepts that you'll be looking out for, such as heightened vulnerability, unconsciousness, and interpersonal identification. And it's set in the context of the criminal justice system, which will give us some interesting insights as well. The story they'll tell is a story about citizen advocacy, which was founded by Dr. Wolfensberger, and it relates to a committed relationship between a citizen advocate and a vulnerable person who's often without protection of family or friends. I'll tell you a little bit about Sharon and Ewan, and then I'll hand you over to them. Firstly, Sharon, I owe a special debt to Sharon, as she was my first passing team leader. And I've been a keen student of SRV ever since, so thanks, Sharon. Sharon's a valued member of the Australian SRV community, with important roles as a passing team leader, a co-teacher of SRV, and she also has important and valued roles in citizen advocacy as an advocate and a board member. Sharon is also a kids club leader, a dog owner, and perhaps her most challenging role is as a mother of teenagers. So well done, Sharon. Thanks for everything. And well done to you as well, Ewan. Ewan's been the coordinator of Capricorn Citizen Advocacy in Rockhampton for 9 years and is passionate about the positive impact that citizen advocacy has on the lives of vulnerable people. He's also a very active community member with lots of valued roles in the local community. He's a scout leader. He's involved with his church, the school PNC, and the Central Queensland University. And all those roles, it's hard to imagine how what Rockhampton would do without him. Anyway, I think that's enough from me, and I'll hand you over to Sharon and Ewan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. And we're talking from the Rumble country in Rockhampton this morning. So our presentation is called In and Out of the Big House, and it's the story of Mitchel and Peter. So there's a photo of Mitchel and Peter. Peter's the one on the left. He's our citizen advocate, and Mitchel is a protege, as we call it in citizen advocacy world. That was taken a couple of years ago. Mitchel was a long-term prisoner, and 4 years ago he was aged 53. He was at Capricornia Correctional Centre, which is a large prison in Rockhampton. He'd almost finished serving a life sentence imposed after he committed a serious offence in 2003. He had an acquired brain injury just before entering jail. He sustained a serious injury to his right frontal lobe. And this ABI impacted his life in prison negatively. He has a short-term memory loss, generalised anxiety. He struggles to understand detailed instructions and to complete complex tasks and to learn some things. But before he went to prison, Mitchel had a fairly usual life, or an ordinary life. He was employed. He was working in his family business as a heavy earth-moving operator, and later in a floor covering business. He also had been an alcoholic, and during his prison term, he attended Alcoholics Anonymous. He was doing that even before he went to prison. Now that he's had this injury, he's unable to work. He's unable to drive a car, operate most equipment, or hold down most jobs. In the prison, he had some work in the kitchen as a storeman, but he only was able to do that by writing down in his exercise book the instructions and follow them. He was very much in a routine world in prison, institutionalised because of the high amount of regimented control over his life, and he was in prison for a long time. He is also segregated from friendships and the usual human bonds in a prison. He lived what you'd call a self-imposed, quiet and isolated life because he wanted to stay safe. So he just kept himself safe by working out and keeping fit. But outside the prison, as his term reached the end and they were talking about his being released, he didn't have a lot of prospects. Outside, he had almost no natural supports. Both his parents had deceased. He'd had 2 marriages, 1 daughter from the first and 2 daughters from the second. However, his family were no longer in his life except for 1 daughter who lived in Gladstone. So he felt very alone and vulnerable about his situation after being in jail for so long. And he really had nowhere to go and he needed to start from scratch. The things that were awaiting him were all challenging: a place to live, a new place to live, accommodation, furniture, household goods, just things like getting an ID and a bank account, food, transport, clothes, a mobile phone. His healthcare was also a challenge because he needed a general practitioner, and he also had to keep seeing his psychiatrist. A key part of his life was the parole board. They had to approve his release, and then after his release, he would have to faithfully check in with the probation and parole. And that involved drug and alcohol testing. And because he is a life prisoner, parole will continue for the rest of Mitchel's life, because once you're out of incarceration, you're still supervised as being a life prisoner. The key part of Mitchel's future was a family relationship with his daughter and her kids. He really wanted to establish a good relationship with them after so long, and they hadn't seen him for a long time. So it was a bit of an anxious time for him, thinking about how that would happen. And just living a life outside of the prison routines, he needed a positive rhythm to his life. So he felt uncertain how to fill his life, his days gainfully. He wanted to restart some hobbies. He's always been keen on things like car restoration, and he talks about gold prospecting. And he was worried about alcohol and other temptations, but the key thing about Mitchel was he was absolutely determined not to return to prison. He did not want to reoffend. Then there were some practical things which were difficult for him and the prison to know what to do. He was disabled, but was he eligible for the NDIS? The NDIS was new. Prisoners were barely on the radar. And back in January 2020, there was very little in the way of planning for people like a prisoner. Corrective Services and the Queensland Health Department were both unable to even confirm if he was eligible. No one arranged an assessment for him. There was just nothing. There was no workable protocol between the two departments. There's 14 prisons throughout Queensland. No one was assigned to do an access request form to the NDIS for him. And it all happened once he got out. And then, was he entitled to a disability support pension? Again, that requires an application to Centrelink and medical documentation, so that wasn't done either. And we've got to introduce Peter. Peter's from a completely different background. He's an experienced secondary school teacher and TAFE teacher. He's owned and operated a cafe. He's had a small business. He still has one, tutoring disengaged students. He had a desire to help the battlers. All his life, he's been empathetic with underdogs and young people at school who don't fit in and do what is expected. Peter's always identified with outsiders because he was brought up in Papua New Guinea until he was aged 11. So cultural differences and learning difficulties like dyslexia, ADHD, trauma in the family, and mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and loneliness. These are the things that Peter recognises clearly. And he was a natural advocate. When he first heard about Mitchel, he was immediately interested in him as a vulnerable person and who needed a hand. So he immediately saw himself as becoming Mitchel's advocate. So Mitchel was in prison and Peter was outside, so he had to do an advocate orientation and get accreditation to go into the jail. But very quickly after he was introduced to Mitchel, they connected and quickly got a rapport going, and the friendship started over time. Peter would go regularly to visit Mitchel, at least every month, and he found out very quickly that Mitchel knew a lot more than him when it came to restoring cars. So things happened very quickly with suddenly Mitchel getting sick and going down to get medical attention in Wakehall. Suddenly he had been transferred down there. But Mitchel's needs was on Peter's mind, were on Peter's mind. He wanted to help. He was thinking about what he could do.
So as an inmate at the prison, Mitchel had well and truly served his time and done his sentence. But the whole process of parole and exit from prison was stalled. He'd done his time, but service staff didn't have time for him. Peter was trying to navigate the systems to put forward Mitchel's situation with the aim of a timely release out of prison to an environment he could call home, somewhere Mitchel would be free to do what he wanted to do, a place to have his own stuff and feel safe. Peter strongly felt that being in Rockhampton or Gladstone would be best for Mitchel, to be close to his daughter that he wanted to build the relationship with again, and to be close to Peter so that he could offer that hand when necessary to help him achieve the things he wanted to do. Mitchel and Peter knew the risks of the old temptations of his life before, and they also knew the risks of society expectations of a convicted felon. So who had the power to decide when he could leave prison? Peter made phone call after phone call, email after email. It seemed to fall on deaf ears. Correctional services didn't work together with the parole board. Community agencies gave the runaround. And the decision seemed to rest heavily on what the psychiatrist deemed to be the done thing for such cases. As Peter attempted to present Mitchel's needs and the doors remained closed, Peter worried that he may be making things worse in the big house for Mitchel. Was his dog with a bone persistence causing more stalling or more mistreatment? Around this time, as Ewan said, he was suddenly transported to Brisbane, to the prison down there, for his health needs. away from anyone he knew at a time in his life when he really needed someone there. But following his recovery, he was suddenly then released for accommodation in Bundaberg, given a train ticket and taken to the train station, having to negotiate his own way there, hours away from his daughter and from Peter, a place where he knew no one, with very little money and very few belongings. From a distance, Peter tried to guide Mitchel to link with needed supports, to spur him on in his resolve to keep his nose clean and answer his questions about life outside and how the world had changed during the last 17 years. Of great importance was enabling Mitchel to connect with his daughter and get permission to leave Bundaberg to go to Gladstone to be closer to them. So began the journey for another home and positive roles and supports in a new location. Another move in quick succession, always in hope of being more steps away from his past life and those negative experiences. Recently, Peter visited Mitchel in Gladstone, and when he arrived, the police were at the units where he lived. Another resident that was considered a troublemaker was in a punch-up with Mitchel. When Peter introduced himself to the police as Mitchel's advocate, the tone of the situation changed, with police much more open and listening rather than in defensive mode. With Mitchel's rap sheet, you can imagine the assumptions that had for him, the misunderstandings that would take place, and the more physical outcome that could so easily ensue. Peter's presence increased Mitchel's social status and enabled Mitchel to be more confident, to not be triggered by the police presence, and to give perspective to the whole situation so that it would calm down. Although Mitchel is out of the big house, he still remains very vulnerable.
So how does Mitchel's life looks now? He is in Gladstone. The parole board did approve him moving. He has some supports from the NDIS, which is good. He gets to help with gets some help with shopping and appointments, and they're going to. He needs to apply to the parole board to move, so the NDIS will help him with that. He has spent quite a bit of time with his daughter and her children, and he likes to do housework and yard work for them. He keeps busy by buying and selling old stuff he gets from the tip shop. He restores it and sells it on Facebook Marketplace. He also has a bike with a trailer, and he collects cans and bottles and sells those for cash. He goes to the library. Keeps in touch with Peter by phone. Peter calls in and catches up when he can. And Peter just introduced Mitchel to his 20-year-old son very recently. Of course, Mitchel does all the parole appointments, and he does drug and alcohol testing. His daughter recently was promoted to a position in Townsville by her employer, and this is why Mitchel wants to relocate. He's a tough dude, and just recently, Mitchel just amazed Peter. He sent him a photo of a scar on his neck, and he said that he'd got impatient with his GP about a lump on his neck the GP was not concerned about, so he cut it out himself. He put it with a Stanley knife, and he put it in a Ziploc bag, took it to the hospital for analysis. The emergency department sutured sutured his neck, and then later the pathology section said he'd got it all out and it had been malignant. So in prison, some of the prisoners would pull their own teeth, so when they couldn't see the dentist. So Mitchel had become quite self-reliant on those things. So Mitchel has got a different life. he's not necessarily got what other men his age have got, with a house, a car, and families around him, and lots of people in a positive network. Hear the bell. But it's a better life, and he's not addicted to alcohol, drugs, or gambling, and he's got services that help him. He's got, most important, a valued life with his family and his daughter that love him, and he's got a valuable friend and an ally and mentor in Peter, and that's a completely freely given, unpaid relationship. And we're just going to finish with an excerpt from a video. Now, you may need to turn this up. Hopefully you'll hear it.
Pete's made a hell of a difference in my life. You know, it's a big change because I was institutionalised for so long. I was inside for 17 years, and it took a lot to change from one and go to the other, really. You know, now I'm at a stage where I'm actually getting my own place, a unit, and things are just coming together. And Pete's still standing there saying, "Good on you, mate, no worries. Need a hand, give me a call."
Excellent. I think we got a wrap.
When do I get paid?
Oh, you just got to order the bloody pizzas.
You've got to work
You're going
out-
to see this later on.
About $5 pizzas on its way. I think if I press this, it will stop.
Just if you did want to watch that whole video, and we've got it on the slideshow, it's on YouTube. We've done another story, which is the ABC has published about another match, and then we've got our contact details.
Oh, thanks very much, Ewan and Sharon. I don't know if anyone has any questions that they'd like to put in chat. Maybe Ewan and Sharon, you might like to just respond to a couple of observations I made about the SRV concepts. The heightened vulnerability of Mitchel. It's almost like it's a similar circumstance to a refugee almost, because he's arrived in society from somewhere else. He's like a forgotten citizen or a non-citizen. So everything, and seems like a lot of people expected him just to stay that way. There's a lot of low expectations or an assumption that nothing much should happen for him, and that and often they seem to be sort of built in and unconscious, those assumptions. And the other thing about Peter, that interpersonal identification of Peter, knowing what it's like to be an outsider. So he had that great connection with Mitchel.
Yeah, so definitely the heightened vulnerability is key, I think, to Mitchel's situation. 17 years is a long time, especially with the big change in technology. Everyone has a phone, everyone has credit cards. You can't do anything in society without those. And so being able to learn those quickly, despite his acquired brain injury, as well as the life imprisonment time, it was very, very vulnerable. But we knew, and he knew, he was very vulnerable to getting in with the wrong crowd, because of his isolation once he came out of prison as well, to go back to alcohol as his, a past friend. And it was his alcoholism that actually caused the brain injury. He had a fall while he was under the influence. And so we just know that, that life path is such a slippery slope, again, once coming out of prison, not having, friends, people around you, not having a job to occupy your time positively. So just, and Peter's support, it wasn't, this sort of, there beside him all the time. It's just in the background, guiding. And it was because they had that interpersonal identification, and because Peter, went to prison regularly to meet with him as a visitor before he came out of prison, the connection was strong. They developed that good rapport. they knew each other well. And yeah, as you saw in the video, if you did, there's just that great relationship that enables them to talk honestly and openly to each other to keep in check. And
so there's a question there about schizophrenia that it's actually a second story, not about this match that is in this last slide or second last slide. So it's just another illustration of how citizen advocacy works in practice, and that particularly identifying with somebody who's vulnerable and helping them, which is very much what citizen advocacy is about. With it sits very, very well within the SRV framework. Now, there was another question I saw here about how did the CA office find out. It was simply, we went to the corrective services, and then we didn't have a match in the prison, and they came up with Mitchel as a potential protege. So prison's full of people that have got disabilities, but they saw him as a person that would benefit from an advocate.
Yeah, so that's at the citizen advocate, the program role of Ewan is to go to the highways and the byways, looking sort of for vulnerable people with disabilities. Yeah, so that's why Ewan, being so connected in community, has opened those doors and looking out for people like that. So yeah, we knock on doors.
Yeah. That's the only match we've ever done at the prison, but there's more we can do. The prison has had a lot of changes, so we are going to need to pick up again with them.
Well, thank you very much again.